Hi, I'm Caitlin, and this is Book Chats. Today I'm doing my March wrap up. March was a really interesting month for me in that I read quite a few things actually in the first week of the month, and then I spent most of the rest of the month trying to get through one particular book, and then also listening to audiobooks. Read 10 books in the month, and 5 of those were audiobooks, and 5 of them were not audiobooks. The very first book I read of the month was Steel by Carrie Vaughn. I read this for the Pop Sugar Challenge. It was just okay. I think I was originally drawn to this book because it's a story about a girl who is a competitive fencer, and she accidentally on vacation gets sucked back in time to a pirate ship, and she kind of has to figure out how to get home and also like survive on the pirate ship. It's not the best pirate book I've ever read. I really enjoyed this old classic called Captain Blood. If you want to read a pirate book, I would recommend that. And so if it hadn't fulfilled this challenge, I don't know if I would have actually read it. The next book I read I really enjoyed a lot. In contrast, it's called Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl by Jessie Andrews. It was funny and interesting and witty and a little bit offensive, so heads up. I really loved, I think, most of all the way that it was written. It was as if the character who was writing it, who's the narrator, was like writing kind of like a screenplay about these events that had happened. It's written in this very irreverent tone of a high school boy. And I heard that it's been turned into a film that did very successfully in Sundance, and I'm really excited in that idea. I really want to see this film. I listened on audio to Watership Down by Richard Adams. This is a kind of an epic tale about rabbits. I think I would have liked it a lot more if I had read it when I was younger. I think if I'd read it maybe in middle school, it was right in like kind of the wheelhouse of books that I was reading at that time and enjoying. I definitely think it's kind of aimed at a middle grade audience, but it's very fat and is kind of difficult to read. I thought listening to it on audio really helped me to actually get through it because it wasn't as daunting to like listen to like 15 hours or how many hours it was than to like see this fat book on my shelf. And also because the rabbits have like made up rabbit words, and it was nice to hear those said to me rather than like having to read them and make them up myself. The next audiobook on my list was Blue Lily Lily Blue, which I'm so glad I got to listen to on audio. If you haven't been following, this is the third of 4 books. The fourth will be published this fall in Maggie Stiefvater's Raven Cycle series, and I have been raving about these on this channel because I've finally been reading them and I've loved them. I kind of just stumbled into listening to them on audio. For whatever reason, I got the first book on audio from Overdrive, and I love the audio versions. The narrator is fabulous. They're beautifully put together. It's just great. Quick explanation for this next book, which after I read it, I was like, oh crap, now I have to include it in my wrap up and it'll be super embarrassing. If you remember at the end of my February wrap up, I talked to my last book that I read in February. It's called Random Family, and it was a nonfiction book, and it kind of put me in this funk for the first week and a half of the month where I was just really frustrated with men, with the patriarchy, with patriarchal society, with the advantages that men have and the privileges that they have and the ways that they can kind of ruin women's lives. And I just was like, wah, 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 men. And I realized that this was tainting a lot of the ways that I was reading books and consuming media and interacting with my friends. And specifically, I went to see Cinderella with some friends, and I realized that half of the problems I had with the movie were problems with the actual base story of Cinderella itself. And I was particularly upset that in this Disney live-action remake of their animated version, it was basically men will save you from women-on-women cruelty or vindictiveness, which I just was like, this is inadequate. And I thought maybe I could snap out of this. I was just like hanging out one night and I was like, oh, I'm just so mad men that I decided to read a romance novel that what happens is when I read romance novels, I usually either read Christian romance novels. I have a couple authors I really like, or I read NASCAR Harlequins. I have a little supply of them that I bought secondhand from a library because it started as an inside joke and then it just became a thing. But sometimes when I'm scanning Overdrive, I just spend a lot of time on Overdrive, guys, like looking at books, and sometimes something will catch my eye there. So Say Yes to the Marquess by Tessa Dare was available on Overdrive. It's a second in this Castles Ever After series. And it was just interesting to me because when I was reading the descriptions of these series, they sounded like very modernish, but then they were like clearly period. I was like, okay, let's try it out. And I've heard really good things about Tessa Dare. Unfortunately, this book neither snapped me out of my man-hating funk, nor was really something I enjoyed. I don't think it's a commentary on like Tessa Dare's ability to write in the romance genre. I think the romance genre is really weird to me. Sometimes I'm feeling it and sometimes I'm not, and I definitely wasn't feeling it when I read this book. I've recently become kind of frustrated and realized that part of my frustration has to do with kind of secular views of romance and love, which is one of the reasons that I tend to read more Christian romances. But even like I get frustrated in general when we place such a high value on romantic love and kind of ignore other kinds of love. I didn't really like the book, but I don't want you to think that's a commentary on the book itself. It's really more commentary on myself. Your mileage may vary if you read romance novels, but if you don't read romance novels, I wouldn't recommend this as a place to start. After I read Say Yes to the Marquess, I listened to The 100 by Cass Morgan on audio. I was not going to read this book because it had kind of bad reviews, but then my little sister got me to watch the show, and I really loved the show, and then I became obsessed with wondering how it was adapted and what the source material was like, and I did not like it. I should have known it's an Alloy book, and every other Alloy book I've tried to read I've not liked, and most of them I've not finished. I probably would not have finished this one, but my sister read it first, and I was interested in the adaptation, and so I chose to finish it. And I'm glad that, in some ways, I'm glad I did finish it because there were a couple things revealed in the last maybe chapter, and it's really short. I think it was like 6 hours to listen to an audio. But then, like, I have no interest in continuing on with the series in book form / on audio. I will continue with the television series, and hopefully, after I finish watching the second season of The 100, I will make a video about kind of comparing the two. Right after that, I read The Bishop's Wife. I should know how to pronounce this because I listened to an audio, but I don't, by Meddy Ivy Harrison. It's an adult novel, and it's set in a Mormon community in Utah in which there's a disappearance, and then later so there's a question about, was that person murdered, or is that person still out there, or like what really happened in this situation, and the main character kind of investigates. There's a lot of unevenness about this novel. It can't really decide what's important to tell you important to the plot or to the setting to know about this Mormon community and what's not. But what ultimately was frustrating about this book, but it helped me snap out of my kind of temporarily misandrist mindset, is that like I clearly was in a funk at the beginning of this month, and I was like, men are just being stupid, they just ruin women's lives. But if I like am in that mindset and I read this book and I'm like, whoa, this main character needs to back off, she's being way too misandrist, she is making assumptions that all men are evil based on really nothing. If I think that about a character, then she's like really gone off the deep end. And so that was frustrating. And then also, like, someone even calls her out on it. She, like, keeps doing all this, like, amateur sleuthing, like, I'm just gonna do it all myself. And, like, a character even calls her out on it. Like, a cop is like, we would not be able to use this evidence in court because of what you did and how you ruined it. But then she keeps just doing it. Like, it's frustrating, and the main character is frustrating, and I would not recommend it because of that. So the last 3 books of the month, one of them was League of Denial, The NFL Concussions and the Battle for Truth. It's by 2 brothers who write for ESPN, I believe. They also worked in conjunction with Frontline, and Frontline did a piece about this as well. It's 2 hours, and I will put the link down below. I watched the Frontline after I finished the book. I think that this is a really important subject to know about if you are a fan in general of American football, or you, in any way, shape, or form, like, I am not an NFL fan, but I am a college fan because I went to a college that is very huge with football. I was really drawn to reading this book because I'd heard good things about the Frontline piece. So I watched and read the book. I personally enjoyed the book better. I thought it was a little more scientific. It went into a little more detail. It went into a little more detail about scientific battles and scientific egos and how egos affect things. And it was just an area I wanted to go. But I think if you're a more deep, like, NFL fan, that you would probably actually enjoy the Frontline piece better. And it is significantly shorter. It's only 2 hours long. Definitely, like, watching the Frontline piece will give you enough. And it's they take some things out. They don't talk as much about the scientific drama, but they also talk a little bit more about the aspect of how this affects, like, high school play and how this affects, like, other leagues outside of the NFL. It's just more focused. The last 2 books that I finished this month, one was called Text from Jane Eyre. I started this way at the beginning of the month, and it's a very quick read, but I stopped halfway through because I had looked at the table of contents, and I knew that there was basically Text from Jane Eyre is, like, there will be a couple pages that are like, oh, if this character's in this book, texted each other, what would they say kind of thing. It's pretty funny. It's interesting. You kind of have to know enough about the source material to really get the jokes. So that's tricky. But I realize sometimes they can be a little spoilery, or you like need to know enough to get it. And one of the later ones was Rebecca. So what happened to the book, I was like, well, I promised my little sister years ago I'd read Rebecca. I have at this point had started reading Rebecca. So now I need to finish reading Rebecca before I finish the book. So really quick text from Jane Eyre. I was able to finish it when I finished Rebecca. I thought it was a good bathroom book, actually. Good to pick up and put down, but not necessarily good to sit and read all the way through. I think your enjoyment will vary based on how familiar you are with the source material she's drawing from. I thought it was good, but not great. So Rebecca took over the rest of my month, and I spent almost the entire month reading this book. It is just a very slow book. It has some beautiful ways that things are said. Some of them are quotes that I'm able to pull, and some of them are just like whole paragraphs that I'm like, she really captured this concept. She really captured this disconnect between these characters. The premise is that this famously unnamed character, like we never know her first name, so she kind of gets rescued from this mediocre situation. It's not bad, but it's mediocre situation by this man that she's in love with. And then she goes back to his like fairy tale kind of place. He lives in Manderley, which is an English manor, kind of like in the style of Pemberley. And suddenly she has to adjust to this life that she has no background in. She doesn't know anything about. And she doesn't feel supported by the people around her, because everything looming over her always is the shadow of Maxim's first wife, Rebecca, which is who the book is named after. And this main character, famously in literature, is unnamed. We never know her first name, and we of course know Rebecca's name because the whole book is about Rebecca. What we know about her is that she's dead. She died about a year ago, and that's pretty much it. We see through the eyes of this main character the ways that she feels kind of Rebecca's shadow looming over her, the ways that people's expectations of her, like, and whether or not she meshes up with Rebecca, how that affects her, and everything is just from her point of view. And she's very naive, and she's very affected by Rebecca, and she's very much in this place where she just feels very kind of oppressed or like compared to Rebecca. And I think that this book could be a fascinating book to study, but just reading it on its own, it took me so long to read it, and I got to the end, and at the beginning of the book, because it's like the character looking back on her time, that she is alive, but that something terrible has happened, and it's very scarring, and they can't even read about, things that remind them of it. And so I got to the end, and I like read the ending, and I was like, that didn't feel scarring enough. I don't know. Maybe I'm calloused and terrible, but I felt like it should have been something bigger. But I think that it would, I should see if there's spark notes for this. I think it might appeal to fans of Downton Abbey. It has a little bit of a similar time period and feel at some points. And perhaps fans of Gone Girl, although its tone and like tempo is more like the first third of Gone Girl than the last 2/3 of Gone Girl. But it's kind of similar, has the suspense thing going on. Because Rebecca so dominated my month, I actually don't think I've written reviews for many of these books, so I apologize. Most of them have stars, but not all of them. If you really want to know about something specifically, please let me know down below. I read 10 books this month. 5 of those were eligible for the Pop Sugar Challenge, which is added to the 13 I've read previously for that challenge. So I've read 18 of 50 books so far for that challenge. I'm on track for my Pop Sugar Challenge. I'm doing really well. I feel really good about that challenge. I read 0 books that qualify for the debut author challenge this month, which means I'm still at 1 of 12. I'm 2 books behind where I want to be personally for this. I read 10 books total, which added to the previous 26 means I have read 36 of 132 books this year. I am still on track for that for my Goodreads challenge. My unofficial challenge, though, which is to get my to-read list on Goodreads under 800, took a big hit in March. Not only did I read 2 books that were not on my to-read list this month, which like really doesn't help me, I also added books because there were interesting books around and books I wanted to read, and I watch people on BookTube and they have interesting suggestions. And so now my to-read list, which used to be 850, is 867. My favorite book of the month was probably a tie between Blue Lily, Lily Blue and Me, Earl and the Dying Girl. They both have very different tones, and I think I just really needed both of those tones at the times that I was reading them. What was your favorite books of March? And how do you feel like you're doing on your challenges? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.